خوب تماشا کن شهر ما رو سیاحت کن، قصه داری فراموش کن، قصه ما رو گوش کن.
I believe there are no accidents. It's no accident that I began as an earth scientist. Earth science is about huge cycles of time. It's not about right now. It's about huge natural cycles that tell us where we fit right now into those big cycles. It's no accident, I think, that I ended up working in the corporations because it taught me how people think when they are in fear, how they think in terms of, and in times of war. It taught me about how to train. Part of my job was training Air Force cadets on software, and some of them didn't want to learn the software. And so I learned about interfacing with people, and all of those principles I use in the work that I'm doing right now. So when I began looking in 1970s, I was looking at geologically at the cycles of the Earth, and at that time there was a concerted effort to keep the scientific boundaries in place. So if you study chemistry, it's in a box. You study archaeology, it's in a box. Geology, anthropology, it's in a box. And I said, you know, nature doesn't work that way. We've got to cross those traditional boundaries because there's a story, and the story is what we're living. So as a geologist, what I could see is that we are living this rare convergence of three massive cycles of change that very few people are talking about in the mainstream media. Bruce Lipton and I shared it at the United Nations. Any one of these three cycles would be enough to turn the world upside down on end. And the fact that all three are converging right now tells us why the change is happening, why there's an openness for new ideas. The three cycles, one we are very aware of is climate. And if only climate were happening, climate change, that'd be enough to change the way we think, the way we grow our food, the way we share resources, the way we interact with one another. There's an economic cycle, 67-year economic cycle that is completing, and by definition, a new one is beginning. And if we don't know that, if we're still thinking about economies, and this isn't only about money, it's about people and the way people work together, share information, and share resources. That's part of the economy. If we are still thinking the way we're thinking 10 or 15 years ago, that's where the struggle and the suffering comes from. The third cycle is fascinating to me, and the United Nations had never heard of this cycle, and I was amazed because I would think that they would. It is a cycle of human conflict. And they said, what do you mean? Doesn't it just happen when it happens? And I said, well, actually, what the science shows is that human conflict ebbs and flows following the rhythms of magnetic fields between the sun and the earth and the human heart. Now, this is where it gets into what's called forbidden territory for science. The human heart is the strongest magnetic field in the human body. It's about 5,000 times stronger than the brain. And what we know, the science is showing us very clearly, peer-reviewed science, is that when the magnetic fields of the earth are strong, we are more cooperative and much less aggressive. And the reverse is true when the magnetic fields are weak. And we are now in a weakening cycle. So it doesn't mean that we must have conflict. It means that we are vulnerable and susceptible. And if you look at the charts, the ebbs and the flows of the great wars in the past, when they begin and when they end, they also end when these cycles, at the peaks and the valleys of these cycles. It means we are now living the greatest opportunity for peace because of our vulnerability, if we have the wisdom to recognize that and not succumb to the forces and the impetus for conflict. So the fact that all three of these are converging right now, that tells us People say, what's going on? This is what's going on. What do we do about it? You can't stop the cycles, but we definitely have the ability to determine how we respond to those cycles. And that's what myself, my colleagues, what we're sharing is how we have the opportunity to awaken our inner power because we are self-referencing beings. So what I mean by that is we are taught to determine our well-being based on the physical, the external world. When the world out here is okay, we feel pretty good. When that world begins to change, if we don't know who we are, that change can be frightening. So right now, we are globalizing the planet. We're mushing together cultures, religions, people, ways of men thinking about women and women thinking about men. We're pushing ourselves together on the one hand, but we're asking ourselves to embrace that change through a thinking that's obsolete. On the other hand, the better we know ourselves, the less we fear strange cultures to us, the less we fear the unknown. The better we know ourselves, the less we fear our own power. And as we embrace our inner power, we're much more comfortable with the external change because we're no longer threatened. So this is what our ancient traditions have told us. The geology helped me to see the natural rhythms that are playing out on the big scale. And the new science, biology, the new science, neurology has helped me to see what that means in our personal lives individually. And so I've done my best to bring those together to a story. So something very interesting happened at the UN. So Bruce Lipton and I were co-presenting, me as an earth scientist, he as a life scientist. He's a biologist, I'm a geologist. And so it works very well together. And while we were presenting in the back of the room, the door opened after the presentation began. And some people came and they shuffled in and they didn't sit down. They were all standing up along the back wall. And it was a little unnerving, as a speaker. I thought, who are these people? And then they all left. And we thought, what was that all about? We discovered later that the UN Secretary General had sent a small delegation to check us out. They wanted to see what we were saying, what we were talking about. And what they took back to him was that they felt it was something that everyone should see. So they turned on the CCTV, the closed circuit television in the UN complex, and anyone that wanted to watch us in that presentation could. Now, we did not know that at the time. It's probably good we didn't know that at the time because I would have changed my language to speak to a broader audience. But it told me that there is a willingness. It's such a different way of thinking. When I was in school in 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, I was taught what is called the standard model. It's a standard model of history, the standard model of human origins and evolution, the standard model of history in terms of linear progression from less sophisticated to more sophisticated. Nothing could be further from the truth. It's not that I don't believe it. The evidence no longer supports it. It's about being honest with ourselves. We've asked science to tell us who we are, and science is doing a really good job. And the question is, are we willing to embrace the story that science is telling us? And there is a battle playing out. And I will say personally, there is a reluctance, in many cases, a resistance to sharing the new discoveries in the mainstream. So mainstream classrooms, mainstream textbooks, mainstream documentary television refuses to share new science-based discoveries, and they are holding on to an old story. I think I can boil it down probably to 3 or 4 words: money, power, ego, habit. That's a short answer. This is why I think it's so important. It's more than a philosophical conversation. As we globalize, as we push ourselves together and we see the fear of what that means, cultures coming together in different ways of thinking, we also see a rise in hate. And hate is only possible because of a way of thinking. We have been taught that human life has very little value through the theory of evolution, that we are a random process, genetic mutations. The textbook says that life is a behavior pattern that chemical systems exhibit when they reach a certain level of complexity. That's the definition of life that we're giving to our young people in school today. And it is such a sterile definition. It leaves no room for the specialness and the preciousness of life. And so our young people, through the video games that are very heartless, very violent, through the media, through the television, where are we instilling into our young people how precious and special life is? And if we're going to change that, when we begin to see what the DNA is telling us, it tells us something far beyond random genetic mutations is responsible for us. And that's, I think, where the change in thinking must begin.
If you enjoyed the video, please drop a like and subscribe. If you have any suggestions for future videos, please leave a comment below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.
Please share and like.